Hey guys, Dylan here, aka Dipstick Motorsports. Today we're looking at a nice product that my friend AJ Hartman sent me. He wants me to do some track testing on this. It's basically just a replacement bushing for the Ford Racing control arm. The Ford Racing unit is just an aluminum sleeve with a Delrin insert. And it does a good job, but you can see in another clip that the way it clamps into the car creates a lot of preload on the swing motion of the control arm. And for a racing application, having a spherical joint inside allows for a lot smoother articulation in the suspension. And so AJ Hartman's come up with this sleeve insert to replace the Ford Racing unit. And he's machined it very nicely. All the tolerances are exactly like the Ford Racing unit. So if we do a quick measurement on here, it's about 60 millimeters, 59.9 millimeters. This unit is very close, 59.9. So the machining quality is done very nice, and he's machined it about 2 thou under. So once you remove the Ford Racing sleeve, it's very easy to press this one in by hand even. So he's recommended to use some Loctite 638 retaining compound. So all you do for that is you want to clean off the inside of the bushing, which I've already prepared. And you just want to hit this with some isopropyl alcohol and wipe it down the sleeve. You want to give the compound a good shake. And then we just want to coat the inside of this. And then we basically just press it in and kind of rotate it as you press it in. Might need to give it a little tap, just like that. And it's seated. Once you get the sleeve seated in the arm, you just want to take some snap ring pliers and get the snap ring seated on there. Just like that. That's to ensure that the sleeve can't come out. Just make sure the snap ring's seated in there. All good. And then for the inserts for the bolt, we want the longer one facing the rear peg. So those just go in, and the short one at the front. And it's ready to be installed back on the car. I love the room I got in here. Lots of room to work. Shove that under there. So the first step is to get this ball joint bolt out of here, and that's just an 18 millimeter on the nut side. And the bolt side's just a 15. I like to use a deep socket and wiggle it in between the tie rod here. And then just break this loose. And this one, you usually need to just tap it out. There we go. guys together. So this ball joint is usually very tight into the spindle. So what I like to do is I made this little pry bar tool, like a chisel, and I like to hammer it in between the knuckle. You can move this steering out of the way. So just kind of wedge that in here. Just wedge that in there a little bit. You should be able to free this out. There we go. Just takes a little bit of persuasion and you can get that out. So you can see the problem with the Ford racing bushing setup. It requires quite a bit of force to go through the articulation, because this forward bushing is kind of a sandwich setup and there's a lot of load, clamp load holding it on to the car. So ideally we want this to be rotating pretty freely. So the next step is this front bolt here is very tight to the steering tie rod, bellows boot. So what you can do is you can turn the steering full lock. We can move this all the way to the left. So that gives us quite a bit of room. And the boot is flexible, so we can try to get something in there. This is a 22 mil. So we can try to break this loose. There we go. So once you loosen that bolt out all the way, you should be able to push the whole knuckle assembly up out of the way and pull the bellows boot up. Just wiggle this. There we go. So now for the rear bushing, it's just a 21 mil. For these, I just impact them off. Those come out nice and easy. Just wiggle this on out of here, just like that. So with the control arm off the car, we can begin disassembling the Ford Racing Delrin aluminum bushing. So I find the easiest way is to just get it into a vise clamp. Just secure it down into a clamp, and then we can try to pry this guy off. So you can take a 1/2 inch socket and just start tapping the sleeve out of there. And that'll free the cap and the bottom cap, usually stuck on there. So what you can do now is we got to get the aluminum bushing out of there as well, which is press fit into the collar, and you can use a 1-inch socket on the sleeve itself. Just make sure you're centered on there, and you can start whacking that. That doesn't seem to want to come out. So I'm going to grab a bigger socket. 1 1/16. I'll try this again. So the big hammer wins this time. Always keep a big hammer handy. So the next step is we can clean the inside of the sleeve. And it looks like this circ fitting is actually a little proud of the hole. Should have probably unbolted this first. So that wasn't really doing anything. Try something a little more aggressive. So here we are back down at the car. I wanted to go over the bolt that Ford used for the forward bushing here. First of all, it's a very long bolt. I think it's about 100 millimeters long, and that makes it a lot trickier to pull it past the steering tie rod. The other problem is the threads. So when this is going through a sleeve, the threads are actually in contact with the sleeve. So when this is torqued down, the sleeve is touching where the threads are, which is not good if this bolt ever comes loose or backs out. And also just with load, especially on track, you start chewing up the inside of the sleeve, and then you're going to develop play. So it's also a torque to yield bolt, so it is technically a one-time use because of the thread stretching. The other problem I noticed is the bolt actually steps down. So it's a M14 bolt, but when you measure this, it's somewhere around 12 millimeters. And when you put that through the sleeve, it has a lot of play, whereas this bolt, it's nice and tight to the sleeve, which is what you want. This one, it just has a lot of play. With the way that this assembly is bolted together, it's clamped, so technically the bolt should be okay. The problem is the bolt comes loose pretty easily in this forward position. There's a lot of load that it sees, a lot of vibration on track especially. So what I've done as a solution is some Nord locks. So Nord locks are great because they just sit underneath the bolt head, and they're a locking pair of washers that prevent bolts from backing out under heavy vibration. They're very effective. They can be reused a couple times, and in my testing so far, it's held up phenomenally. So with this setup, this bolt setup, it's a reusable bolt. It's a 10.9 bolt, and it fits the sleeve a lot tighter, and with the Nord locks, the vibration is a lot less likely to come loose. So we'll get this back on the car. Go over that quick. So this just fits up in there nicely. And what I like to do is take the rear bolts and just loosely put them through the holes. You can see this flag, I had to trim a bit shorter because when you tighten this down, the factory flag sticks out enough that the tire can actually contact when you're running really wide front tires. So those will hold the whole assembly in while you can try to get this bolt in. So I also, with this bolt, like to put a little bit of blue Loctite in there, which is always a good idea for an extra vibration. So we've got the Nord locks and the blue Loctite. And then we get to do the fun part of wiggling this back through. So once you wiggle that through, it's still very difficult even with the shorter bolt. You can just start tightening that. And actually with the Nord locks and the blue Loctite, I only tighten this to about 140 foot-pounds. So once you get that threaded in, you can just barely wiggle a 22mm1/2 inch torque wrench in here. I had to buy a Capri Tool 22mm socket short, and I only torque this again to 140 foot-pounds or so, because the Nord locks will hold it in better than the OEM bolt does. One other tip with the Ford Racing control arm is the rear bushing. You want to tighten it while it's pushed all the way in. You want to push it in because that's going to give you a better caster angle for track. So you push it all the way in, and then what I like to do is just impact them on from the bottom while I'm pushing it. Just snug them up. And then these rear bushing mounts get torqued to 136 foot-pounds with the 21mm. After torquing the rear bushing pegs, the next step is to get the Howe ball joint back into the spindle. So this one's a lot of fun because, again, the Howe joints are very, very tight to the spindle. So what I like to do is, you want to make sure your steering is somewhat in the center. And then you want to take a tool, like a wedge, into the knuckle here. And make sure it's not interfering with the bolt hole. Hammer that in. And then you want to make sure the slit is aligned where the bolt's going to be going through. And you pretty much just have to hope you can wiggle it in there. Sometimes it really fights, other times it goes in easy. And this time looks like it went in pretty easy. So you want to press it up until it's about in line. And then you can take the wedge out and try to get the bolt through. Oops, other way. So you want to do the bolt from the front. And you don't want to tap this in because you want it to slide through freely. So might have to put the wedge back in there, just so the ball joint has a little bit of play. You want to give it a little bit of wiggle room. There we go. Clean. And then all you have to do is torque that bolt down and pretty much done.